Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Faye D'Souza. You're watching live with Faye on YouTube. As always, we bring you conversations every evening that help us understand issues facing our country better. This evening, we're talking about contempt of court proceedings that's now being moved against a cartoonist. And this after, remember, contempt of court proceedings was approved by the AG against comedian Kunal Kamra. The AG has now given consent, the Attorney General has now given consent to initiate contempt of court proceedings against the cartoonist called Sanitary Panels that functions largely on Instagram and on Twitter. I'm not going to use the name of the cartoonist in question or her photograph because as a young woman, she is going to be subject to a tremendous amount of very harrowing trolling, and we don't want to add to that problem, as we know is already exists at this point. So let's just call her Sanitary Panels for today. She put out two cartoons questioning the independence of the Supreme Court. I think it depends on how you interpret it. The questions that we're going to ask today is: does a stick figure cartoon bring down the dignity of the Supreme Court? And in order to do that, we have to read out of my favorite book, which is the Constitution of India. Now, in your fundamental rights, the Constitution of India under Article 19, every citizen of this country is given the fundamental right to freedom of speech and expression, with some exceptions. And the exceptions are defamation, decency, morality, security of the state, friendly relations with other states, incitement of offense, sedition, public order, and contempt of court. Contempt of court is actually number 2 on that list. I put it last for suspense. But contempt of court. Now, what is contempt of court, and what sort of reasonable limit does that bring on to our freedom of speech? Does the stick figure qualify as contempt of court? Does a stick figure cartoon bring down the dignity of the court? In that case, what is the difference from other cartoons, for example, that we've seen in our newspapers all of these years? Political cartoons tend to actually raise questions and poke fun at some of the ridiculous things that happen in our society, and they've been doing for a very long time. This, for example, is a cartoon that appeared on the Times of India some time ago, and we'll go through these cartoons one by one a little later. I just want to introduce my guests. Also, between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, we'll have two cartoonists join us to talk about their point of view. But right now, we're examining the legal aspect of this. And to help us understand this better, two gentlemen, Mr. Prashant Bhushan, who is a lawyer and an activist, and also a survivor of said contempt of court proceedings against him as well. And Mr. Sanjay Hegde is a senior advocate with the Supreme Court. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you both here and to have you give us your time. First question, Mr. Bhushan. As per our constitution, it says if a particular, if a particular statement brings down the dignity of the court, and I'm paraphrasing here, does that include cartoonists with a reasonable following on Instagram who might have put up something that, sort of questions the Supreme Court? Does that qualify in your opinion?
Yes, it does qualify. I mean, cartoonists would also qualify. But however, the question is, what does scandalize the court and what does lower the authority of the court? In my view, this whole law, which is an archaic colonial law, and was made at a time when the judges were supposed to be the representatives of the king. So any contempt for the king was supposed to be punishable, and that's how this law came. It's more or less it has been done away with England. In England, it has never been there in America. There, the test for contempt of court is clear and present danger to the administration of justice. So therefore, no amount of speech or cartoons which may be very critical of the court, which may even denigrate the court, which may show great contempt towards the court, would amount to contempt either in UK or in USA, from where our jurisprudence has been borrowed. Unfortunately, we are continuing with that law, and the problem is, firstly, to judge as to what scandalizes the court and what lowers the authority of the court is very subjective. In my view, the authority of the court depends upon how the people perceive the actions of the court to be. It does not depend on shutting the mouth of somebody who may be very critical or who may even be contemptuous of the court. So therefore, this is a totally wrong-headed view. And in this jurisdiction, judges sit in their own cause. And if it's in the Supreme Court, there is not even any appeal against that, even though the Supreme Court has said that there needs to be at least one appeal against any criminal conviction. So it's a jurisdiction which is totally arbitrary, liable to be abused, and in my view, should be done away with. Unfortunately, we are persisting in it, and the result is that every contempt proceedings brings the court into greater contempt and ridicule. This is what happened in the contempt proceedings against me, that far from enhancing the authority or the dignity of the court, it did exactly the opposite. And far from instilling any fear in the people of contempt, it had exactly the opposite effect. So many cartoons came out, so many people said worse things on the social media, so many articles, even more critical than what I had said in my tweets, came out, written by very, very respectable commentators. And the result was that the court has become the subject of much greater public ridicule as a result of those contempt proceedings. So therefore, it is not only wrong and unjustified, it is also counterproductive in my view to invoke this jurisdiction, and it should be done away with.
Well, Mr. Sanjay Hegde joins us as well. Mr. Hegde, good evening. Picking up from what Mr. Bhushan said, that this is an archaic law. It doesn't suit our democracy at this point. It must be done away with. There does seem to be a different sort of application of this law. Now, I want to share on the screen, Mr. Hegde, if you can see the screen, a cartoon that was published in the Hindu on the 11th of October, and this is 2017, I beg your pardon, 11th of October 2017, which basically makes fun of a judgment against firecrackers, while the bigger pollutants, obviously referring to Delhi, industrial pollution, motor vehicle pollution, dust still loom large. Is this in contempt of court? How is this different from the Sanitary Panels comic that has now been pulled up?
Well, this is a criticism of the court's judgment. Yes. It is not a criticism of the judge. It does not attribute motives to any judge. So you are always free to criticize any judgment, saying the judges got it wrong, the judges got it horribly wrong, whatever. Or for this particular case, firecrackers contribute only a little pollution. All the big sources have gone away scot-free. You are entitled to say that. The stick figures, not to put too much of a defense on it, but the Attorney General's perception seems to be that one stick figure says that the gentleman of repulsive television says, "Tu janta hai mera baap kaun hai," and then proceeds to adopt the Supreme Court. And the other stick figure cartoon is one where it's a depiction of a building which looks like the Supreme Court, yes, with a saffron flag on it, and says Sangi Court.
Yes.
Now, neither of them also, to my, if I were to be asked for my permission, I would say none of them attribute any motives to any particular judge. They do not interfere in the system of justice. This is an opinion. People are entitled to it. However, it does, the Attorney General in his justification while granting contempt says that it looks as if this particular cartoon imputes motives to the judiciary in as much as it lacks impartiality, that it goes towards suggesting that the judiciary favors only one side. That is the Attorney General's perception. Was it the cartoonist's perception? Was it intentional that be the only perception conveyed? I think there was plenty of room for doubt, and in these doubtful cases, I think that the courts are best served by just letting matters slide, ignoring these things. Now, one thing I want to make clear to your audience: just because the Attorney General has granted permission does not mean that it is a slam dunk.
Okay.
That the court will automatically rule that this is contempt. The Attorney General's permission is but one step of the way. Thereafter, the overeager law student, whoever he or she is, will have to go and file a petition. That petition will come up, and at that stage also the court can say, "Oh, come on, we are not going to get into this. Very good, good. You got permission from the Attorney General. Go, please put it on some on your biodata or CV hereafter when you apply for employment elsewhere. You've got your 5 minutes of fame. We think that we are best advised not to go further." So we don't know exactly how the courts will proceed in these matters.
Is this then a case of incidentally law students looking for their 30 seconds of fame and perhaps an overprotective AG?
Well, the AG doesn't need fame. That's for certain. The law students, yes, there could be some kind of competition. And here it is where law colleges and other law students would serve a good purpose if they tell their peers, look, there are causes and causes that we can espouse, but anything which reeks of tattling to the authorities, anything which is calculated to be a means of harassment of an ordinary citizen who is expressing an opinion, that is not what we are training to be lawyers for. But then there are law students and law students, there are lawyers, and there are attorneys and attorneys.
Mr. Bhushan, same question to you. Do you believe that the AG is being overprotective here? Or is there a different sort of adjective you want to use?
I think, yes, the AG is being overprotective here because, you see, in my contempt proceedings, he told the court that there are several retired judges, and he said that I have 8 statements of 8 retired judges and chief justices who have said that there is considerable corruption in the court. So therefore, saying that there is corruption in the court is not contempt according to him. Now, saying that the court has become saffronized, why should that be contempt then? That's a matter of opinion. I mean, if somebody feels that the independence of the Supreme Court has collapsed, that's an opinion that he has. And that opinion is based on his perception. So long as it is a bona fide opinion that a person has, why should it be contempt? I mean, in a democracy, that's what Article 19(1)(a) says, that there is freedom of speech. That's the most important fundamental right under our constitution, that we, in a democracy, we have the right to criticize any public functionary or any public institution, so long as we do it bona fide. And moreover, in my view, you see, even if there is some vile abuse against an individual judge or even against the court, so long as it does not interfere with the administration of justice, the test should be whether it interferes with the administration of justice or any court proceedings directly. If it does not, then it should not be treated to be contempt. Otherwise, you see, it's a jurisdiction which is fraught with all kinds of dangers. It's very arbitrary and subjective. Judges sit in their own cause. Moreover, there's no appeal in a criminal contempt conviction by the Supreme Court, etc. And it invites greater public scrutiny and invites greater public ridicule in most cases. This is what the experience has shown.
Mr. Bhushan, there were many opinion pieces that were written in newspapers and on websites by very senior members of the legal fraternity about
I
how
wrote them also.
these judgments. Yes, I want to quote one by Sriram Panchu that everybody shared at that time. It was written on the 16th of November. He said, "Protect our republic, my lords," and he talked about how he basically felt that our republic was in danger, and he cited, many cases which he felt were needed attention. How is this different from the cartoon that has been put out? Mr. Bhushan first, and then
No, Mr. Sriram Panchu, being a senior seasoned advocate, has couched what he has said very carefully and crafted his article very carefully. Now, a cartoonist or a comedian like Kunal Kamra doesn't craft what he is saying very carefully. They are often quite crude, and they are sometimes over the top also. But even so, the point is that these kind of things which do not directly interfere with the administration of justice should not be treated as contempt. And as I said, such proceedings are counterproductive. They are bound to bring the court into greater public ridicule. There is a very strong perception that the court's independence has collapsed. And therefore, in that sense, people can call it a saffronized court, meaning a court which is kowtowing to the present government, which is a saffron government, so to say. So that's a view that a very large number of people have. Very large number of people have publicly expressed those views, including senior advocates, including retired judges, etc. And you can't stop that. If you try to stop that by the threat of contempt, firstly, that is totally wrong in a democracy. And secondly, it will be totally counterproductive. It will just bring the court into greater contempt and ridicule.
Mr. Hegde, same question to you, and I know that you wanted to comment on Sriram Panchu's argument. So basically, unless you are a seasoned lawyer who can frame the sentences really carefully to sort of avoid getting yourself into trouble, should be taken that none of us should ever comment on the Supreme Court? One. And second, Bharat Rawal asked this question: if you can't criticize the Supreme Court where you believe it has gone wrong, how will there ever be any improvement? Is this a repeat of the emergence?
Well, the last question first. I don't think it's a repeat of the emergency. I think it's an improvement on the emergency. It is, for form's sake, you have all the institutions. But to borrow Mr. LK Advani's picturesque words, that when asked to merely bend, they began to crawl. These days, I think we have certain people who are almost willing to do a Nagin dance. It is that bad. Now, having said that, with regard to Mr. Panchu's article, I also wrote a major piece in the Hindu. There were several of us who wrote it. But it's basically this. As Prashant said, we certainly want the contempt jurisdiction to be there when it interferes with the justice system, when there is active interference. But when there is discussion, when there is comment, then you go back to the famous dictum of Lord Atkin that justice is not a cloistered virtue. It must be allowed to suffer the outspoken comment of men. So they may be outspoken if mistaken. There is no question that of using the contempt jurisdiction as a gag or muzzle against free speech. Now, even when it comes to interference in the course of justice, there have been people who have taken a step backwards, and there's an instance of a losing litigant losing his school, taking off his shoe and hurling it at Chief Justice Hidayatullah. Chief Justice Hidayatullah then ordered the shoe to be given back to the man, said, he's lost his case, he should not lose his shoe as well. So there have been judges who have displayed great grace under fire. We do not need to be thin-skinned about every criticism, and also we certainly should not be prodded into action by lawyers who have not yet been born, lawyers who have not yet seen the way the justice system works. Law students who are over anxious can be told that, look, you've got your 5 minutes of fame wherever. Please go back to your law colleges, study a bit harder, and get good marks. And discover that law is a vast ocean, much beyond this one little jurisdiction of contempt.
I beg your pardon. Yes, that was very actually beautifully said. We also shared on the screen a column written by Mr. Sanjay Hegde himself called "Becoming the Court," the court of all citizens, where he's raised questions. Of course, remember, like both of our guests have said, senior lawyers have the ability to design their arguments in such a way that they sidestep any landmines as far as contempt is concerned. Ordinary citizens aren't able to do that. We have a question from Bertie Booster, I'm assuming not the real one, who says, I can't eat what I want, marry whom I like, read what I want. Now I can't lampoon what I don't like. I have to use fictional characters in my name to express this as well. Why don't they just ignore it? So here's my question to both of you. Does this mean regular citizens who aren't able to design arguments like the two gentlemen on the panel should avoid commenting on the Supreme Court, should avoid commenting on any sort of judgments that come in, should simply sidestep anything that involves the Supreme Court, because we could make mistakes without understanding the law and wind up in trouble. Let's also, even if I have, say, 80 followers on Instagram, if there are overzealous law students who are great at research, digging this out and filing complaints to the AG, then they're going to find us. So does it make sense to sort of just not comment? It's not democratic, but it's safer. Mr. Bhushan, you first.
No, if you are overly concerned about being punished for contempt, then yes, you can adopt that course. But in my view, that would not be a responsible thing for an active journalist or an active citizen to do. I think we should learn to lose the fear of contempt. And that is what happened when contempt proceedings were initiated against me. People lost the fear of contempt. People started saying the same things. Millions of people said the same things, which I had said in my tweets. Many more people wrote articles which were even more strident than what I had said in my tweets, including, as I said, senior advocates and retired judges, etc. And people, because how many people will they charge for contempt? If people, of course, people should say things responsibly. Everybody, every journalist, every cartoonist should be responsible in what he is saying about any institution, what to say of the court. But if you have been responsible and if you believe what you are saying, many people today, I know millions of people today who believe that the court has become saffronized or that the court has surrendered its independence to this government. This is the view of millions of people in the country. And how will you initiate contempt proceedings against millions of people if each one of them starts saying what he feels, what he genuinely and bona fide believes about what has happened to the court? So therefore, I feel that the responsible thing for people to do is to say things responsibly, but be outspoken about everything, including about the courts.
Mr. Hegde, same question to you as well.
If I were to put on my Jeeves hat and answer Bertie Booster, the thing is that if people had shut up, how would the Supreme Court have undone its mistakes? One great example is the 377 judgment.
Yes.
Two rather prim judges of the Supreme Court thought sex against the order of nature was something in which the state had an interest to interfere and criminalize. And it was the howl of a young India which basically got the Supreme Court thinking. And the Supreme Court is supreme not because it's infallible. It is infallible because it's the last court. So, but beyond the Supreme Court, there is something called public opinion, and the public opinion also contributes to the molding of law. So if the court gets it wrong, if something happens which possibly could get a different bench in a different case to take a relook, I don't think people should keep quiet. And of course, they crafting what they want to say carefully is not all that difficult. You know, a long time ago, the British royalty sued a newspaper because it was alleged that the Prince of Wales that time was having it off with an actress called Lily Langtry.
Yes.
So the obviously royalty won in court, and the paper had to apologize. Said there is nothing between His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales and Miss Lily Langtry. That came on day one. The next day they put up a huge banner headline, not even a sheet. So the thing is that if contempt is used like a blunderbuss, people will find their ways around it, and people will be careful. Now I don't think the Supreme Court wants to figure among the dictators of the world who inspire great humor. You know, whenever dictators clamp down on free speech, humor gets all better all the time.
I just want to share one more thing, and I want both of our guests to answer this. You did say, of course, you have to be a little bit careful. Mr. Bhushan saying you shouldn't hold back. Mr. Hegde saying you shouldn't hold back. If there is something that needs to be said, it will be said. I want to share this cartoon that came up in the Times of India as well. This is referring to a judgment of the Gujarat High Court. Again, it's very craftily put forward that the justice has done a U-turn here. Away from the violence and moved in the other direction. If you want to put out guidelines, now here's the tricky question. Comment on the judgment and do not attribute motives to the court or the judge. Is that correct? Mr. Hegde, is that the guideline?
Absolutely. Never say that the judge is so and so, and therefore this was the judgment. Don't attribute any motives of any kind, pecuniary, political, personal, all that.
No, but I have a slightly different view on this.
I'm playing safer, Prashant. I'm playing safer, and we are telling a lay audience what to do. So, as far as the lay audience is concerned, lay off the judges in relation to judgments. You can criticize a judgment, saying that this is a stupid judgment, it's an unworkable judgment, or the judgment will have this effect. Yes. Discuss principles, not personalities. That would be.
What about motorcycles, Mr. Bhushan?
No. You can attribute motives if the motive is very clear. For example, so many chief justices recently have sat as judges in their own cause. Justice Deepak Mishra in his own medical college scam case, then Justice Gogoi in his own sexual harassment case. Now, in those cases, people would be entitled to say that, look, I mean, he was personally interested and involved, therefore he gave this judgment. So therefore, you can attribute motives, or if you have enough evidence of a judge taking a bribe for giving a judgment, you can certainly say that he has taken a bribe for giving that judgment. So you can say that, but only, or you can even say that, look, if you see, as Justice Shah and many others have said, that if you see the recent behavior of the Supreme Court, you will see that they have almost never done anything against the government, against this government in the last 3 or 4 years, which the government was seriously interested in avoiding. And therefore, it is clear that the independence of the judiciary has collapsed during this time. So this is something which people are entitled to say, and serious commentators can certainly say that. But as I said, it should be, if you attribute motives to a judge, you should have some evidence of that motive. You should do it on that, with that evidence, or on some basis, on some firm basis.
There's a question that's coming from Shefur Rahman Hussein, who says, wasn't this the same court that said if you don't like the channel, don't watch it? How is it different for a cartoonist work? Can it not be said that if you don't like the work, don't look at it? We must remind our viewers, like Mr. Hegde said, that this is the AG giving his consent for someone to file a complaint if they choose to. Once they file a complaint, the court will then decide whether or not it wants to entertain that complaint. So you mustn't mistake this for the fact that the court is taking action. That's not what's happened right now. But Mr. Bhushan, you want to comment on that? The fact that, the court has, if we take that as precedent, the court in its observations saying that if you don't like something, don't look at it. Does that apply in this case as well?
Well, I would say that should apply because unless there is a sort of interference in the administration of justice. For example, you threaten a judge that if you decide this way, I'll break your leg. Or if you threaten a witness, or even if you threaten a lawyer, that's interference with the administration of justice. If you don't allow court proceedings to go on by creating a ruckus inside the court, continuous ruckus, that's interference with the administration of justice. But merely saying something about the court, even in my view, even if it is abusive, etc., you can take action for defamation. Both civil and criminal defamation are available to judges as well as to the court as an institution. But there is no need to take contempt action for just speech. In my view, that's wrong and that's counterproductive.
Mr. Hegde, there is something to be said about journalistic training in a newsroom. When we join as cubs, we have editors who throw things back in our faces on a regular basis saying, are you mad? You can't write this about the court. Go rewrite it. And that's how journalists learn what can and cannot be said. There's a certain rigor that's put into place. Also, the cartoonists who work with newspapers are constantly told, dude, we can't publish this. But now with social media, technically every layperson is also a publisher, because you now have access to a public forum, which was not the case earlier. So as a result, do you believe that all lay people now should familiarize themselves with the laws of the land before they tweet, Insta, put up cartoons, sort of self-publish, because that's effectively what we're all doing?
Yes. Ignorance of law is no excuse, is a legal dictum. So as much of the law as you can get to know, please do get to know. And with regard to courts, as I said, argue on principles, do not argue on personalities. And if you can say something in a sweeter tone than what you set out to do, yes, that would be safer. Yes. That would be much safer.
Or as always, you could befriend a lawyer. That might help if you're in the habit of putting out, statements on social media. Gentlemen, thank you so much for giving us your time. Both Prashant, Bhushan and Sanjay Hegde, helping us understand what we can and cannot say as per the law in our country as far as contempt of court is concerned. But we have two comics joining us now. Rohan Chakravarty is a cartoonist who creates green humor. And he's very popular across the country. And Appupen is a comic creator, the founder of Brainded India, or you could pronounce it Brainded India, you can pronounce it Brainded India, whichever you want to choose. Thank you both for joining us. Just to do a recap of what the two lawyers told us, and this is really important because this is what I was saying earlier. Now we're all self-publishers because we're using social media. This is what they said. You can criticize a particular judgment. And I remember, for example, when the courts decided that there would be an alcohol ban on the highways, and those highways ran through our cities, and many of our pubs and nightclubs were on those highways, and now there was a ban, and so they couldn't function anymore. There was a lot of criticism about that, saying it didn't really make sense, and it wouldn't really achieve what it set out to achieve. But attributing motives of any kind to the judge or the court is a problem for a layperson. Unless you have solid evidence of what you are saying, this is what Prashant Bhushan added, and also Sanjay Hegde is saying, argue principle, not personality, argue, logic on the judgment and not on the individual. This is what they are saying. But coming back to both Rohan and Appupen, I want to ask you a completely different set of questions. Rohan, you first. Good evening. This is, I think, the first time you and I are speaking in person.
Yes, absolutely right.
Yeah, we've been in touch for a very long time. I'm a big fan of your work.
Thank you.
How difficult is it right now for someone like you? Are you being super careful, double-checking, triple-checking your stuff? Is it impeding your creativity?
I'll be honest, Faye, I think this whole crackdown on creative freedom for a person like me is, I view it more like the triggering of an evolutionary arms race. It's a contest between the satirist and the authority. And in the end, if you're a good satirist, you win. You try and figure out ways around the crackdown or the ban. So I think it's all, while it's scary, it's also an exciting challenge.
Exciting how?
Exciting in the sense that you have what is cartooning? It's a kind of illustration, and what is illustration at the end of the day? It's an exercise of solving problems, right? And that is what is the challenge for an artist. And if these authorities come up with bans or various laws inhibiting creativity of any kind, you face the challenge of trying to find a way around it. So that's what I mean by an exciting challenge. It's about solving problems, and it's always an exciting challenge for an artist who takes this up.
Appupen, same question for you. Do you find it now? Are you scared before you put stuff out? You're like, maybe not. Bad idea.
I'm not as popular as Rohan, so it's okay. Not many people see it.
None of us are as popular as Rohan.
I think it's also about how many people you reach and what kind of impact you have. It's part of what Rohan was saying also. I always think that satire is a kind of smart way to look at things, and we rely on a certain amount of intelligence for the satire and the humor to get through. And humor is very important for me also to put it in. And we've had cases where some of our posts did really surprisingly well, and we figured that the satire was lost and it was being shared by people who were not really supposed to share it. So that's probably a way of going around the system, but we might reach much lesser people when we do that.
No, but that argument I don't buy, because Sanitary Panels has 80,000 followers on Instagram. You have 99,000 followers. So you are more popular than her. So that, that we don't reach enough people is not enough, because like I pointed out in the previous half hour, these are law students. Now, I'll tell you, as journalists, whenever we're looking for someone to do, hours and hours of research, we look for law students, because this is what they're really good at. Law students are now spending their free time finding somebody to complain about. They will find you. So are you, so actual size and reach is not really an argument here. Are you consulting your lawyer friend saying, hey, dude, can I put this out? Should I change it? Have you familiarized yourself with the laws? How are you making this work?
I just took my lawyer out for coffee the other day. So yeah, I'm working on it. Having said that, I wouldn't have used the word exciting had I been in Rachita's shoes right now. So yes. Yeah, I do have the privilege of not being noticed as much as Rachita at the moment.
So Rohan, just to remind you guys, we're not using her name as far as possible, because we don't want, as a young woman, she's already, I'm assuming, getting a lot of trolling. So we're just going to call her Sanitary Panels for now. We've not used her photograph. We've not used her name. I really wish that other people in the media would do the same. As a woman in public life, I can tell you it's horrible. So if we can avoid her any of that pain, it would be great. But I want to talk to you about what the two lawyers were saying a little earlier. The fact that they said that there are rules to how this is done. Right? You can criticize the judgment, don't criticize the judge, don't attribute motives to the court. Is this something you familiarized yourself with, Rohan? When you're working, have you read through the laws? Because when you're in a newspaper, for example, you have an editor who sort of puts an eye on everything. But when you're functioning by yourself, how do you make that work?
So, Faye, most of my professional work actually happens with newspapers, and I am very used to the process of editing. And I think it's a very good thing for an artist to develop his or her portfolio and body of work, to be edited and to be under the supervision of an editor, just to know what works, what doesn't. So, see, this is something that R.K. Lakshman said very famously, that what is a cartoon? It's a reflection of the country's mood on that particular day. And that is what I think the job of a cartoonist is. It's not to enforce your opinion on your reader, but to reflect the country's mood on a particular day. So, in my opinion, the more indirectly, the more nuance a cartoon has, the more indirectly your opinion is presented, the more effective it is. And I think that's the approach I adopt in my work, or I at least try to. I may disagree with a certain hardline stance that Sanitary Panels has often taken in their work, but it doesn't mean that I would call for a ban, or I would call for a shadow on anything I disagree with.
Right. Appupen, I'm going to share something on the screen that you put out. It's very interesting. They're hands together in front of the Supreme Court, and it says, "We don't want to be held in contempt of the Supreme Court." Is this, is this your tongue-in-cheek sort of, a lot of people are not going to get it, humor?
Actually, we shared all the solidarity posts on Brainded. It's just a platform I run with friends. So I have not seen this image actually, but Ria, my editor, has put it up, and we go with it. Yes. This was just, I think the idea is just to show that all artists are kind of in the same soup over here, and I don't know how much rules we can really expect people to learn and do things. For our part, I have a fantasy angle to the whole thing. So we'll put. I talk of Rashtriya, a country where a superhero of power is running amok, and I try to focus it on power and how power can be misused using media, religion, all these things, state and corporate, everything. So to answer the earlier question, how to cover it or how to disguise it in a way, these are the ways you can take it. And I kind of buy it because the fantasy at times is very thinly veiled and you can see through it, but I'd rather put it in the fantasy space, because now if I look at it in a reverse, I can think of the Lord of the Rings also and say that it's a fantasy take on what's happening in the country right now. Till now I never knew what the orc was thinking or anything, or how he would behave online, but now I know how an orc can just repeat things and follow the supreme leader's voice and just be the orc, so I know how he behaves also now. So it's both ways, the fantasy and how it reflects.
George, I was expecting to see you in the Rashtraman costume.
I think I should make it. It'll be the only way I can run with.
Yeah, that's the only way you can get away with a lot of stuff right now. But let's actually just focus on your advice at this point. And because you do a lot of stuff in solidarity with other artists, do you have advice for other cartoonists at this point, saying, listen, be a little careful, consult with someone before you put stuff out? Or are you saying, viva la resistance right now, let's just all go at it? What's the mood?
George, after you.
Appupen, go ahead. I was talking to you. Sorry.
I think it's you have to be a little clever about it with your art. That's the whole point. It's not really that the rules are so sacrosanct that we can go by it. Tomorrow it might change and become something else also, and we have to keep in track. So like Rohan said earlier, the earlier books, the published books, went through very good editors who would really clear up stuff for me. So you know that, generally these are, and when you read your contracts with like publishers, there are many things that we cover in that. I think there is a general responsibility to keep that and keep your territory free of these kind of things. And now it's a place where people are getting more and more sensitive, right? It's whose feet you're treading on becomes the question. Like you may not even expect it, but somebody who's like, who you expect support from might be offended with something also. But yeah, if it's about the humor and if it's about being clever with it, I go with it. I think there was a lot of satire that we grew up with in Kerala also, like even in mainstream movies, the satire was very on, and some like people might see it violent right now, but it was quite on, and that was what we came up with. And there was a lot of Mad Magazine making fun of things. What does that do? Like it punctures that balloon, that thing that you're floating, right? So it just makes it poof, and you just see it for what it is. Like I saw the Rambo cartoon in Mad. Till then I was a Rambo fan and everything, and they just took the pants off, and I was like, no, after that got through, right? So we demystify things, we bring it down, maybe like get a chance for people to look at it in a real way, because there's so much propaganda going on.
So I have a question for the both of you. I know there are a lot of other artists, and we've seen this happen to OTT platforms. We've seen this happen to comedians. Everybody, right? Everybody's getting heat right now for taking on the establishment. A lot of them are turning around and saying, you know what? Let's do halka stuff. Let's talk about cricket. Let's talk about the weather. Let's talk about COVID. Let's talk about, Bagalwali auntie. Let's not do establishment, because who wants to die on that hill? Like, who wants to get into that kind of trouble? Did you also consider that? Rohan, you first? Did you say, you know what, let me just draw birds, which you're really good at. Why take on the establishment if it's going to bring in heat?
No, frankly, Faye, I was avoiding politicians for a while because I didn't find them pretty enough to be my subjects. But then, the confluence of environmental matters and governance was just inevitable, and it's something that my work evolved into. No, see, if I'm allowed, I'll take you back to a time in 1950 when K. Shankar Pillai, who was a legendary cartoonist, a predecessor to R.K. Lakshman, was starting out his publication Shankar's Weekly, and Jawaharlal Nehru had said to him quite famously, "Shankar, do not spare me." That was a kind of freedom given by the Prime Minister of this country to a cartoonist then. So I'm just wondering if we, as a base of readers, as this whole country, were a smarter base of readers in the 1950s compared to this, which is actually quite shameful.
That is true. It does seem like we're becoming more sensitive instead of becoming more open. If we consider, let's say, I mean, look at the track record, right? Just look back. There was the Tanishq ad that people got really prickly about. There was A Suitable Boy and a kiss that people got really upset about. I think we've gone, what was it, the 80s or the 90s when kisses would upset people? We've gone back to that. When, Bollywood would not show people kissing. There'd be like two flowers. Is that, where we want to be? And now we have this. Have we just generally become more prickly? And then it becomes a slippery slope for an artist, right? Because you don't know, like you said, you don't know who's going to take offense. Anything could offend anybody.
Back in school when we were given Shakespeare class, I think like 8th standard, 9th standard, there was the court jester, the bard, who could make fun of the king. And in the beginning, I could not get it. Like, why is he allowed to like make fun of the king and everyone's laughing at the king? But, then that idea of humor and wit and why that word wit came in, and it just struck, and suddenly the Joker became my hero. Like, not the Batman Joker, but like, the funny guy, because it's a lot of the wit happening, right? And the king also has to be, well, kind of cool enough to like accept that, okay, this joke's on me, but he's trying to make a point and it might be better for the country in general. I see we come at it from childhood stories, and it's not like Rohan and I are like thinking of like what science fiction conspiracy to take or something. It's like the childhood stories we listen to. When there is injustice, the hero acts, and usually the hero is like you tell those stories to kids to imbibe certain values, right?
Yes.
And now you grow up and you say like, hey, those values are not cool. We should have like glorified the villain in place. Then, we will be thinking like that, I'm sure. So story has a lot of potential and power, and that's why we tell kids these stories. And I think the general narrative is changing now, like I think we'll have to slowly go back and change the stories we tell our kids. Like do a retake on all Jack and the Beanstalk and everything, like the giant is the guy. Something like that.
So yeah, don't upset the giant, Jack. Walk away, put the pen down, Jack, walk away slowly.
Better still, just sell the milk and come back home. Don't like go for the beans at all.
Don't be a hero. Rohan?
Advice for artists. I actually have an advice for readers. And I never imagined I'd be giving this advice to 70, 80, 90-year-old men. But I really would like them to learn to take a joke like adults.
Let's take the joke like a grown-up. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us and for answering those questions. Of course, both of these guys have excellent work. You can check it out on Instagram and on their Twitter. Go find them. Awesome work. And some of it really hits home. And like we've been saying, as an audience, we seem to be getting more and more sensitive, or maybe there are parts of the audience that are looking for reasons to get sensitive about. We're better than that. We're more grown up than we were back in the 60s now. It's a more open world. We perhaps should open our minds a little better. Quick recap for those people who are going to use social media. Unlike what was happening in the 50s and the 60s, you now have access to mass media through your Twitter and your Instagram. You are publishing. Hence, you are liable to get into trouble for contempt of court and for defamation. What do you need to do specifically with contempt of court? You can question a particular logic of a judgment, not the judge himself, not the court. Cannot question the motives or attribute motives to a judge or the court unless you have solid proof, which really you'll only know if you have solid proof if you're consulting a lawyer. And if you're not willing to do all of this, then be a little careful of what you're putting out. At the end of the day, we must understand the laws of our country. There is no excuse for not reading the book. Everybody buy the book. This is my favorite book. Everybody buy a copy. Keep it in your house. It's always useful. It's really the holy book of this country, although we do get distracted on a regular basis as to which one the holy book really is. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. And thanks to our audience for spending the last half hour with us. We will, of course, keep coming back every day at 8 o'clock with more conversations of things that are happening in our country that are of interest to us. Thanks for watching.